Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We are so happy you joined us today because the topic we have for you is something that comes up in English conversation every single day. And it is one of those things that sounds small, but makes a really big difference in what you are actually saying.
Yes, and what makes this topic so interesting is that both questions look almost the same. They're only one word different. What will you do and what would you do? But the feeling behind them is completely different.
And if you use the wrong one in a conversation, you might confuse the person you are talking to or give the wrong impression about what you're asking. So today, we're going to make this completely clear and simple.
By the end of this episode, you will know exactly when to use what will you do and when to use what would you do. You'll understand the feeling behind each one, and you'll use them naturally and confidently.
Let's start from the beginning. Mary, let's talk about what will you do first. In the simplest possible words, what does this question mean?
Okay, so what will you do is a question about a real situation, something that is actually happening or is very likely to happen. You're asking about a real plan or a real decision that the person actually needs to make.
So it's grounded in reality. The situation is real or very likely real.
Exactly. So, for example, your friend has a job interview tomorrow. You ask them, what will you do if they offer you the job? That's a real situation. The interview is actually happening tomorrow. The offer could actually come. You're asking about a real possible outcome.
And the question expects a real answer. The person listening to that question knows they actually need to think about this because it's genuinely happening.
Right. What will you do is connected to real life, real plans, real decisions, real situations that are happening now or are very likely to happen soon.
Another example. Your friend just found out their landlord is raising the rent next month. You ask, what will you do about the rent increase? That's real. It's happening. You're asking about their actual plan.
Yes, the rent increase is real. The decision is real. What will you do is the perfect question there.
And one more. It's raining outside and your friend has no umbrella. You ask, what will you do? Completely real situation happening right now. You want to know their actual plan.
Simple, real, happening. What will you do is the question for real situations.
Now let's talk about what would you do? Mary, how is this different?
So, what would you do is about an imaginary or hypothetical situation. The situation is not actually happening. It's a pretend scenario. You're asking someone to imagine a situation and then tell you what they think they would do in that imaginary world.
So it's like asking someone to step into a fantasy or a pretend world for a moment.
Exactly. So, for example, what would you do if you won $1 million? Nobody's handing you $1 million right now. This is not a real situation. It's imaginary. You're asking someone to imagine it and tell you what they would do in that imaginary world.
And the person answering knows this is not real. They're just playing along with the imagination. It's a fun thought experiment.
Yes. What would you do if you could fly? What would you do if you were invisible for a day? What would you do if you became the president? All of these are imaginary. None of them are happening. They're hypothetical.
And the key word in all of those is if. When you hear what would you do, followed by if, it's almost always a sign that the situation is imaginary or hypothetical.
That's such a great observation. If is the signal word. What would you do if something happened? It means the something is not really happening. It's just a scenario you're asking someone to imagine.
Now let's look at them side by side really clearly. Real situation, use will. Imaginary or hypothetical, use would.
Yes, will is for reality, would is for imagination. That's the heart of the difference in the simplest possible terms.
And this is not just true for questions, this is true across all of English. Will is connected to real future plans. Would is connected to imaginary or hypothetical situations. But today, we're focusing on these two specific questions.
Right, and focusing on these two questions first is a great way to understand the bigger principle too. Once you feel the difference here, you'll understand will versus would in many other situations as well.
Now let's talk about where you actually hear these questions in real everyday life, because examples in real situations help so much more than just rules.
Absolutely. So what will you do comes up in everyday real conversations all the time. Your exam results come out tomorrow. Someone asks, what will you do if you pass? The exam is real. The results are coming. The question is about a real upcoming event.
Your phone is broken. A friend asks, what will you do without your phone today? Real situation. Your phone is actually broken right now.
You're moving to a new city next month. Someone asks, what will you do about finding a new apartment? Real and upcoming. A real decision needs to be made.
It's the question you ask someone when their life is actually presenting them with a real challenge or a real decision.
And what would you do comes up in very different kinds of conversations. Deep personal conversations, hypothetical debates, fun games, getting to know someone, exploring values.
Yes, like those late-night conversations with friends, where you ask big imaginary questions. What would you do if you only had 1 year left to live? What would you do if you found out your best friend lied to you? These are imaginary scenarios to explore a person's values and thinking.
And also in professional settings. In job interviews, sometimes the interviewer says, what would you do if a client was unhappy with your work? They're not describing a real situation that already happened. They're giving you a hypothetical scenario to see how you think.
Oh, yes, the hypothetical interview question. Very common in job interviews and professional settings.
And in English class or debate situations, what would you do if you were in charge of the country? These are designed to make people think and express opinions about imaginary scenarios.
So what will you do is for navigating real life. What would you do is for exploring imagination, values, and hypothetical thinking.
What a clear and clean way to separate them. Real-life navigation versus hypothetical exploration.
Now let's talk about a slightly more advanced point. Sometimes would is also used to be polite or softer even in a real situation. Is that right?
Yes, this is a really important point, and it's something that confuses learners. In some situations, would can sound more polite or more gentle than will, even when talking about something real.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine you're at a shop and you want to ask someone for help. You could say, what will you do to help me? But that sounds a little direct or even demanding. Instead, you might hear, what would you do in my situation? Or simply, what would you suggest? The would makes it softer and more polite.
So in polite requests and soft suggestions, would can appear even in real situations because it softens the tone.
Yes, but for learners at the beginner and intermediate level, the safest and clearest rule is still this. Real and actually happening, use will. Imaginary and hypothetical, use would. That rule will serve you well in the vast majority of situations.
Absolutely. Master the basic rule first. The polite use of would will become natural over time through listening and exposure.
And honestly, once you understand the basic difference, your ear will start to catch the polite use of would naturally without needing a separate rule for it.
Now let's talk about the mistakes, because I know our listeners want to know exactly to watch out for. The biggest and most common mistake is using will in hypothetical or imaginary situations. So a learner might say, what will you do if you had $1 million? But had is past tense, and that signals this is hypothetical. So the correct question is, what would you do if you had $1 million?
Right. The moment the situation is clearly imaginary or hypothetical, would is the correct word. Using will there sounds strange to a native speaker because will signals real plans and real future situations.
Another way to spot this mistake is in the if clause. If the if clause uses a past tense verb like had, were, or could, the main question should use would, not will.
So if you had, if you were, if you could, these all signal that the situation is hypothetical. The main question should always use would in those cases.
What would you do if you were president? Not what will you do if you were president. The were tells you it is imaginary, so would must follow.
The second common mistake is using would in a real situation. Someone might say, what would you do about your sick friend? And the friend is actually sick right now. But since it is real, what will you do about your sick friend is more natural.
Right. Would in a real situation makes it sound like you're treating the real situation as imaginary, which can sound strange or even dismissive, like you do not think the real situation is actually real.
So using would when the situation is real can accidentally make it sound like you do not believe the situation or you are not taking it seriously.
Exactly. Real situations deserve will. Imaginary situations deserve would. Giving them the right word shows you understand the situation correctly.
A third mistake is forgetting that would is always used with the base form of the verb. Some learners say, "What would you did?" or "What would you doing?" These are wrong.
Yes, after would, the verb must always be in its base form. What would you do? What would you say? What would you choose? Never what would you did or what would you were doing.
The same is true for will. What will you do? What will you say? Base form always after will as well.
So, both will and would are always followed by the base form of the verb. That structure never changes.
And a fourth mistake I want to mention is overthinking this in fast conversation. Some learners get so worried about choosing will or would that they freeze up and cannot speak naturally.
Oh yes, this is so common. The worry about making a grammar mistake actually stops people from speaking at all, and silence communicates nothing.
So even if you accidentally use will instead of would or would instead of will in a fast conversation, the person you were talking to will almost always still understand what you mean.
The context of the conversation usually makes the meaning clear, even if the word choice is not perfectly correct. So please, speak first and worry about perfection later.
Confidence and communication come before perfect grammar every single time. Get your message out there. The fine-tuning comes with practice over time.
And every time you notice yourself using these correctly, that's a moment worth feeling proud of. Those small victories add up to real fluency.
Let's do a practice round now. I'll describe a situation and you tell me whether to use will or would and why.
I'm ready. Let's go.
Your friend just lost their job this morning. You want to ask about their plan. What do you ask?
What will you do now? Because the job loss is real. It actually happened this morning. The situation is real and your friend genuinely needs to think about their next step. Will is right.
Perfect. Next situation. You're having a fun conversation with your friend and you ask them to imagine they could time travel. You want to know where they would go.
What would you do if you could time travel? Because this is completely imaginary, no one can actually time travel. It's a hypothetical scenario just for fun. Would is right.
Excellent. Third one. Your friend's landlord just told them they have to move out next week. You want to know their plan.
What will you do about finding a new place? The situation is completely real and urgent. The friend actually has to move. Real situation means will is correct.
Great. Fourth one. You're at a team meeting at work and the manager asks everyone to imagine a difficult client scenario. They want to know how you would handle it.
What would you do if a client rejected your proposal? It's a hypothetical work scenario designed to see how you think. Imaginary situation means would is the right choice.
Last one. Your friend has an exam in 2 hours and they haven't studied at all. You're asking them right now what their plan is.
What will you do? Real situation happening right now, 2 hours until the exam, completely real and urgent. Will is perfect.
5 out of 5. Brilliant reasoning on every single one. Listeners, pause and try each situation yourself before listening to the answers. Ask yourself, is this real or imaginary? That one question gives you the answer every time.
Yes. Is this real or imaginary? Real means will. Imaginary means would. Write that on a sticky note and put it somewhere you'll see it every day.
That's a great study tip. A little reminder in your study space can reinforce a rule until it becomes completely automatic.
And this week, try to notice these questions in English content you consume. Movies, shows, podcasts, conversations. Every time you hear what will you do or what would you do, notice which one was used and think about why.
That kind of active listening is one of the most powerful ways to make grammar feel natural. You're not just hearing English, you're understanding it at a deeper level.
And try to use both in your own conversations this week. Ask someone a real question using will, ask someone an imaginary hypothetical question using would. Real practice in real conversations is what makes the language yours.
Let's close with a clear and simple final summary of everything we covered today.
So, what will you do is used when the situation is real. Something is actually happening or is very likely to happen in real life. You're asking about a genuine plan or a genuine decision. What will you do about the rent? What will you do if you pass the exam? What will you do now that you've lost your job?
And what would you do is used when the situation is imaginary or hypothetical. You're asking someone to step into a pretend scenario and explore what they think they might do. What would you do if you won $1 million? What would you do if you were invisible? What would you do if you could go back in time?
The one-word difference between will and would carries a huge difference in meaning. Will says this is real, would says this is imaginary.
The signal to watch for is the if clause. If the if clause uses a past tense verb like had, were, or could, the situation is hypothetical and would is correct. If the if clause describes a real likely event, will is correct.
Common mistakes to avoid: using will in imaginary hypothetical situations, using would in real actual situations, using any form other than the base verb after both will and would, and overthinking to the point of not speaking at all.
Both will and would are always followed by the base form of the verb. What will you do? What will you say? The base form never changes.
And remember that would can also appear in polite real situations as a softener, but master the real versus imaginary rule first, and the polite use will come naturally over time.
Real situation equals will, imaginary situation equals would. That's your anchor. Hold on to it and you'll use these correctly almost every time.
We're really proud of every single person who made it to the end of this episode. You're doing the work, and that work is building something real inside you.
Keep showing up, keep practicing, and remember that every question you ask in English, whether with will or would, is a step forward in your journey. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everyone, and see you in the next episode.
See you soon.